I paid for my parents' entire mortgage just so they wouldn't lose their house. Well, it's about time she did something useful, my dad snorted when signing the deed. I let them finish their champagne before handing them the notice I had been waiting for. To sum it all up in a nutshell, I paid off my parents' mortgage after years of watching their finances fall apart, hoping to save their home. The house had been in jeopardy for months, but instead of asking for help, they dug themselves deeper into debt and kept up the facade that everything was fine. I didn't want them to lose everything, so I took the leap. But when I finally handed them the papers to sign, my father just snorted and dismissed it, claiming it was about time I did something useful. I didn't let the comment bother me, I had waited too long for this moment. I let them finish their celebration, then handed them the notice. The moment had finally arrived. I never intended to get involved in my parents' finances. I'd always prided myself on being independent, building my own life in my mid-30s with a small apartment, a job I didn't love but got by with, and a circle of friends that I genuinely enjoyed. I didn't need to be sucked back into their world. But here I was, staring at the latest letter from the bank, a harsh reminder of just how deep they were sinking. It was a final warning before foreclosure. I wasn't blind to the situation. My parents' marriage had always been a bit complicated. My dad, Patrick, was a man who believed in work and pride, sometimes too much so. My mom, Diane, on the other hand, was quieter. She was always the rock, holding things together, at least in public. But over the years, cracks began to show. They'd been living in denial for so long, acting like nothing was wrong while their financial situation worsened. The trouble started when my father lost his job. It wasn't a surprise. He had been working at the same company for decades, but the world changed, and his industry had dried up. He had always been stubborn about adapting to new ways of thinking, and by the time he realized his skills weren't as relevant as they used to be, he was already too far behind. Meanwhile, my mom did her best to maintain an illusion of normalcy. She'd go out of her way to buy new furniture, pay for vacations they couldn't afford, and throw extravagant dinner parties as though we were still living in a place of comfort. In truth, she was just trying to keep the facade up, to hold on to the family image that she thought was worth preserving. I watched it all from a distance. The money problems. The increasing tension between them. The unspoken resentment that built up over the years. It was painful, but I didn't interfere. Not at first. I had my own life to live, and frankly, I didn't think they'd ever ask for help. They were too proud. But things spiraled, and after my father's car accident, an accident caused by his own poor decisions and a lack of attention to his surroundings, the financial situation went from bad to worse. The medical bills piled up on top of the mortgage. I don't think they even realized how deep in debt they were, to be honest. There were notices from the bank, from the credit card companies, even from utility providers. I remember the first time I found out about the second mortgage. My mom had been avoiding the mail, shoving it into a drawer and pretending it wasn't there. I was at their house one afternoon, visiting for what should have been a simple lunch, when I accidentally stumbled upon a letter from a lender I didn't recognize. When I opened it, it was clear that they had taken out another loan to cover bills, but they hadn't paid it back. It was set to default in 2 weeks. Panic set in. It wasn't just the money, either. It was everything, the house they'd worked so hard to buy, the memories we all shared there, everything they had spent years building. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that they weren't going to ask for help. They'd rather lose the house than admit they needed anyone. I didn't want them to lose everything. I didn't want to see them have to start over. And so, I made the decision. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I couldn't just sit back and watch them self-destruct. For months, I scrounged every penny I could, putting aside the little I earned from my job. I had enough for a small emergency fund, but not much else. But I didn't hesitate. I contacted the bank and asked them what it would take to pay off the mortgage entirely. They gave me the numbers, and I scrambled to make it happen. The money I had saved, combined with the years of scrimping and not spending on luxuries, was enough. I had just enough to pay off their mortgage and the second loan that was threatening the house. I don't think they ever realized how much I had set aside, or how serious things had gotten. But now, in this moment, I was ready to step in and fix it. I remember the day I made the payment. The papers, the bank's confirmation, everything was in order. I stood in front of the house, holding the deed and the final mortgage payment. I had to do this. Not just for them, but for me. It was time to stop watching from the sidelines and to take control of the situation. That evening, my parents were hosting a small gathering. A few neighbors, some old friends. It felt like any other dinner party they'd thrown over the years, except this time, everything felt different. They were celebrating, but I could see the underlying tension in their eyes. The cracks were there, hidden under the sparkling glasses of champagne and the laughter filling the air. I walked in, holding the envelope with the papers inside. The moment I stepped into their living room, the atmosphere shifted slightly. My father looked at me over the rim of his glass, and I could tell that, despite his attempt to smile, he wasn't happy to see me. My mom, ever the gracious hostess, greeted me with her usual warmth. But I could feel the unease in her. She knew something was coming. "Lily, darling, glad you could make it," my mother said, giving me a tight hug, too tight as if she wanted to reassure herself. My father, Patrick, barely acknowledged me at first, busy chatting with a neighbor. "Good to see you," he muttered, without much enthusiasm. My father was never one for warmth. His feelings always ran deeper than he let on, but it took a lot for him to show it. "I need to talk to you both," I said, finally. My voice didn't shake, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "It's important." Patrick's eyes flicked over to me. I could see the annoyance settle in his face, as if he were already bracing for another one of my lectures about their finances. "This better not be about something else," he grumbled, not hiding his irritation. "I've been looking at the situation," I said slowly, "and I've decided to take care of it." Patrick furrowed his brow, obviously confused. My mother looked at me quizzically. "Take care of what?" she asked, the confusion in her voice giving way to a hint of worry. "The mortgage," I said, reaching into my bag. "It's paid off. The house is safe." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I could see Patrick's expression shift from confusion to disbelief. His fingers tightened around his glass, and his face turned red, but he didn't say anything. He simply stared at me, waiting for me to explain further. My mother's hand went to her chest, a soft gasp escaping her lips. "Lily, you really did this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "It's done. It's all paid off. No more bills, no more debt." Patrick finally spoke, but his words weren't gratitude. He scowled, snorting derisively as he set his glass down on the table. "Well, it's about time you did something useful." The words cut through me more than I wanted to admit, but I had been prepared for that. His pride had always been more important than anything else, and I knew I wasn't going to get the thank you I deserved. I took a deep breath and pushed forward, handing him the deed. I didn't expect him to appreciate it. Not now. But I did it anyway. The rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable silence. My parents didn't seem angry, but they didn't seem grateful either. I knew they were both grappling with the reality of what I had just done, helping them in a way they could never have asked for. I'd stepped in, yes, but it didn't feel like a victory. As I left their house that evening, the weight of everything I'd just done settled heavily on my shoulders. I didn't expect their approval. I didn't need their thanks. All I wanted was to ensure they wouldn't lose their home, and I'd done that. I left my parents' house that night with a strange mix of relief and disappointment settling over me. Relief, because I knew the house was safe, and I had done what needed to be done. Disappointment, because of how it had unfolded. I had spent so many years hoping that my father, at least, would see my efforts and acknowledge what I had sacrificed for him. But that night, he barely seemed to care. As I drove back to my small apartment, the night air cool against my skin, I replayed the events over and over in my head. I had taken care of everything, paid off the mortgage, saved their home, wiped out the looming debts, and yet it felt like I had done something wrong. The words he had said, so cold and dismissive, echoed in my mind. Well, it's about time you did something useful. Why had he said that? Wasn't this the thing that mattered most? Didn't they understand the magnitude of what I had done for them? Maybe, in their minds, it wasn't enough. Maybe they had always expected me to do more, and yet I was never quite enough for them. I wasn't loud enough, strong enough, or brash enough to get the recognition I so desperately craved from them. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, but that never seemed to be enough for him. Back at my apartment, I pulled the blinds down and sank onto the couch, staring at the phone in my hands. Part of me wanted to reach out, to call my brother Richard, to talk to someone who might understand, but I hesitated. Richard had always been different. He never seemed to care about the small details, never worried about our parents' financial struggles or their health. He lived in a different world, one where things seemed to just work out for him, regardless of how much effort he put into them. He'd moved to Charlotte years ago, and I rarely saw him anymore, except for the occasional holiday or family gathering. Besides, it wasn't like he would even care. If I told him what I had done, he'd probably just brush it off. "Dad doesn't need your help," he'd say with that easy confidence of his. "He'll figure it out." So, I did what I usually did, I kept my thoughts to myself. I spent the evening in solitude, replaying my childhood in my mind, the good parts, the parts that felt like they still had meaning, the parts one could hold on to when the world felt like it was crumbling around me. I thought about how, as a child, I used to sit at the kitchen table, watching my mom bake cookies while my dad read the newspaper. I thought about how, before all this financial mess started, they used to laugh together, share stories, and talk about their dreams. What happened to that? What happened to the parents I had grown up with? And when did it all start to unravel? The next few days felt like a blur. I didn't hear much from my parents, which was typical after a family confrontation. My dad kept his distance, too proud to acknowledge what I had done, too stubborn to admit that he had let things get this far. My mom, though, she seemed different. She sent me a text message one morning, a simple one, just saying, "Thank you, Lily." I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't much, but it was something. A sign, perhaps, that she understood, even if my father never would. Still, it wasn't enough to erase the sting of his words. I had been hoping for more than just a thank you. But then again, I shouldn't have expected anything different. I had spent my whole life trying to earn his approval, and it never came. Not with my grades, not with my career, and not with this. Maybe, in the end, it wasn't about him. Maybe it was about me. A week later, I received a call from my mom. She sounded different. Softer, maybe. The edges of her voice weren't as sharp, and she didn't seem as distant as usual. "Lily," she said, her tone quieter than I was used to. "Your father and I talked." I was sitting at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, half listening. "About what?" "About the house," she said. "And about what you did." I could feel my stomach twist, unsure of where this conversation was going. "Yeah? And?" She paused for a moment, as if collecting her thoughts. "We both agreed that we should have done more, Lily. We should have asked you for help sooner. I know you didn't have to do this. And I know your father, well, you know how he is. But he's been thinking about it. He doesn't know how to say it, but—" "Mom," I interrupted, my voice steady. "You don't have to defend him. I didn't do it for his approval." "I know," she said, her voice softening. "But he's not as proud as you think. He just doesn't know how to show it. He's been upset with himself for a long time. He didn't want to admit that he needed help. And he didn't want you to feel like you had to fix everything." "I didn't fix anything," I said quietly. "I just paid off a bill." But my mom didn't respond immediately. She was quiet for a long moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "We've been talking about it," she said, finally. And we both realized something. We've been too proud. And too stubborn. We've made so many mistakes, Lily. I know we haven't been the parents you wanted us to be, but we need to try harder. I didn't know what to say to that. I'd spent years waiting for this conversation, for my parents to finally admit that they had messed up. But hearing them say it, finally, felt strange. Like they were finally acknowledging the distance that had always been between us. I'm glad you're saying that, I said softly, feeling a tightness in my chest. But I don't know if it changes anything. It's not about the house. It's about everything else. I know, honey, she replied, her voice quieter now, as if the weight of what she was saying had settled in. It's not just about the money. It's about us, as a family. We've been so focused on what's wrong, we forgot to look at what's right. We forgot to look at each other. It felt like a turning point. Like something was finally shifting in the air between us. But I still wasn't sure if I could let myself believe it. The last time I had felt hopeful about my parents was when I was a child. Since then, that hope had been chipped away, bit by bit, with every disappointment, every broken promise. But there was something in my mom's voice that told me she wasn't just saying the right words this time. Maybe they were finally ready to change. Maybe they had realized that the damage they had done wasn't just financial, it was emotional, too. And maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to carry the weight of their mistakes alone anymore. The next few days passed uneventfully. I went to work, did the usual chores, and tried not to think too much about my parents' house, or their changing attitude toward me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. That maybe, for the first time, we were all standing at the edge of a new chapter, a chapter where we could all try to fix the things that had broken us over the years. And yet, as much as I wanted to believe in this newfound sense of closeness, part of me was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because with my family, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. The damage had been done, and I wasn't sure if we could ever truly go back to what we had once been. But that didn't mean I couldn't try. As the days stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to me like a second skin. My parents were saying the right things, but words were just that, words. I had spent years waiting for actions, for real change. And though their apology felt genuine, it was hard not to remember how many times in the past they had promised to do better, only to fall back into old patterns. I focused on my daily routine, work, groceries, the occasional meet-up with friends. I tried to keep my mind busy, but it was always there, the feeling that I was living in some kind of limbo, waiting for something to shift permanently, or waiting for the other shoe to drop. In a way, I was living the same way I had always lived, except now, the burden of my parents' financial instability had been placed firmly on my shoulders. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about what had happened before, what was happening now, and what might come next. One Thursday evening, just over a week after the phone call with my mom, I got a text from Richard. It was short, as usual, "Dad wants to talk to you." I stared at the message for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen. My brother had always been the one to reach out when things needed fixing, but this felt different. Richard wasn't one for deep conversations. If anything, he was the kind of person who would shrug off serious issues, and only bring them up when it had become absolutely unavoidable. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I didn't want to deal with my father. Not right now. But I couldn't ignore this. I hadn't seen him in over a week, and I had been avoiding him in person for a while. I didn't know how to face him after everything that had happened. "Okay. When?" I texted back. "Tomorrow night. At the house." The response was immediate. Richard was never the kind of person to waste time when it came to these things. It was always to the point. The next evening, I found myself sitting on the couch in my parents' living room. The house looked the same, no real changes since the last time I was there. My mother was in the kitchen, making some kind of casserole for dinner. It was almost too quiet. There was a heaviness in the air, as if something was waiting to be said. My father was sitting across from me, his eyes fixed on the floor as he tapped the arm of his chair nervously. I didn't know what to say. The last time we spoke, I had handed him the mortgage papers, and his reaction had been less than welcoming. I had expected something, anything, but his dismissive attitude had left me reeling. Part of me thought he would have come to some kind of realization by now, but in the back of my mind, I wasn't so sure. Finally, my father cleared his throat. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes briefly flicking to mine before looking away. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years, uncertainty. Lily, his voice faltered. He paused, as though he were struggling to find the right words. It was unusual for him. He wasn't one to hesitate or second-guess himself. He was a man of action, or so he liked to think. I waited, my stomach tightening. Look, about the house, and everything else. I don't know how to say this, but I've been thinking a lot. He took a deep breath and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I should have never put you in that position. I should have handled things better. But I didn't, and that's on me. I should have asked for help long before it got this far. My eyes widened slightly. Was this an apology? Was this him acknowledging the truth for the first time? I didn't respond immediately. I couldn't. My father had always been the type to talk around his mistakes, never really owning up to the damage he'd done. This felt different, but I wasn't ready to believe it yet. He exhaled slowly, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. There was something raw in his gaze, a vulnerability I rarely saw from him. I'd been too proud. Too stubborn to admit that I needed help. He paused, as if weighing the significance of the words. But that night, when you handed me the papers, I realized just how wrong I'd been. You did what I couldn't, and I can't. I can't ever thank you enough for that. I didn't want to rely on you, Lily. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who needs his daughter to bail him out. But I see now that I didn't have a choice. And you were the only one who could help. I felt a lump form in my throat. Part of me wanted to say something, to tell him that I didn't need his gratitude, that I had done it because I loved him, because I didn't want to see them lose everything. But the words didn't come. All I could do was nod, a mix of relief and frustration rising in me. And your mother, he began again, his voice softer now. She feels the same. We've both been blind to the damage we've done. To you. To our family. There was a long silence. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fingers tapping against the armrest. I could see that he was still struggling with the weight of his words. I had always known him to be a man who would never admit he was wrong, who never backed down. But here he was, finally saying the things I had wanted to hear for years. Just as I was about to respond, my mother stepped into the living room, carrying the casserole she had been working on. The tension in the room seemed to lighten a bit, as if the air had been cleared, but there was still so much left unsaid. Dinner's ready, she said, setting the dish down on the table. She glanced at my father, her eyes lingering for a moment before she looked at me. We've been talking, Lily. We know we've made mistakes. And I think, for the first time, we're both willing to try harder. To be better. Not just for the house, but for you. For us. I didn't know how to react. I had waited so long for this moment, but it didn't feel like the relief I thought it would bring. It was almost too late for words like these to fix things. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to think that my parents had finally learned from their mistakes. But years of disappointment made it hard to accept. Instead of answering right away, I simply nodded. I didn't trust my voice. I wasn't sure I could say what I needed to without letting my emotions get in the way. So, we sat down to dinner, the awkwardness lingering between us like a thick fog. But for the first time in a long time, there was a flicker of hope, a small spark that maybe, just maybe, we could start rebuilding. Not just the house, but the relationship that had been so fractured for so many years. And as we ate, the conversation drifted to other things, safer things, like the weather and the neighbors and what we'd be doing for Christmas. But the words I had longed to hear, the words my parents had finally said, hung in the air. They weren't perfect. But they were a start. The days following that dinner felt like walking a tightrope. There were no grand gestures, no sudden transformations. My parents' words hung in the air like delicate threads, too fragile to hold up the weight of years of miscommunication and disappointment. But I wasn't ready to trust them just yet. I had listened to their promises before, promises to change, to do better, and then they'd always fall back into their old ways. This time, I wasn't about to let them off so easily. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. The anger had burned out over the years, replaced by something more solid, hurt and the sharp sting of betrayal. My parents had spent my whole life teaching me that hard work and responsibility meant something. Yet, here they were, asking for help after they had wasted everything. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about trust. The trust that had been broken over and over. The trust that I had tried to build but could never seem to repair. For the next few weeks, I kept my distance. My father sent me occasional texts, short ones, nothing too emotional. Thanks again for saving the house, they would read. But there was no real warmth behind the words. It was as if he was trying to fulfill some obligation to me rather than genuinely express gratitude. I spent most of my time thinking. Working, yes, but also planning. I didn't know how, but I knew one thing, things had to change. If I was going to continue to take on this responsibility, I couldn't let them just go back to their old ways. I needed to make sure this was the last time they'd be in this position, without being cruel, but without giving them a free pass either. They needed to learn, really learn, that their actions had consequences. And that's when I decided it was time. Time for the final piece of the puzzle. One crisp Saturday afternoon, I drove out to my parents' house once again. They weren't expecting me, which, honestly, made the moment feel even more calculated. I didn't give them any warning. I didn't call ahead to check in or try to gauge where they were emotionally. This had to happen on my terms, and it had to be clear. I wasn't there to fight, to have a blow-up argument, or to hash out old wounds. I was there for one reason, to finally make them understand that their behavior was no longer acceptable. When I arrived, they were on the back porch, enjoying the sun and chatting quietly. They looked content. But I knew better. They were content because they didn't fully grasp the depth of their situation, because they still thought that everything would somehow work itself out. My mother looked up as I approached, her face lighting up with a small smile. "Lily, sweetie. What a nice surprise." I didn't smile back. I didn't even acknowledge her greeting. I was done with pleasantries. My father stood up, squinting at me in confusion. "Lily," he asked, his voice laced with that familiar mix of surprise and irritation. "What's going on?" I didn't waste time with small talk. I reached into my bag and pulled out the legal documents I had prepared in advance. My parents' eyes locked on them as I placed them on the table in front of them. "Sit down," I said, my voice calm but firm. I wasn't going to let them brush this off. Not this time. They exchanged a quick glance, then both sat down, eyes widening in anticipation. My father was the first to speak, his voice tinged with impatience. "What's this, Lily? We already went through all the paperwork. You don't need to do anything more." I folded my arms, looking at them both. My mother seemed unsettled, but my father was still acting like he could brush everything off with a wave of his hand. This time, I wouldn't let him. "No," I said slowly, "this isn't just about the house. This is about everything that's happened. Everything that's been ignored for years." I let that statement hang in the air for a moment, watching as the tension in their faces started to grow. It wasn't that I wanted them to suffer. It was that I needed them to face the reality of what they had done, to me, to themselves, and to our family. "I'm not here to gloat," I continued. "And I'm not here to lecture you. I've done all I can. But there's one thing I need from you both, something you've never truly given me: accountability." My father's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" We've been talking about this. We've been trying, you haven't been trying, I cut in. You've been lying to yourselves, pretending everything's okay. This house, your pride, it's not the only thing at stake. It's everything. It's the trust you broke when you decided to hide things from me, when you let your mistakes pile up instead of owning them. The silence between us deepened. My father's face reddened, but my mother looked like she was on the verge of tears. I wasn't done yet, though. I had one more card to play. Before you get upset, I continued, my voice unwavering, I want you to know this is something you'll thank me for in time. But you're not getting away with it anymore. I'm transferring the house back to you, just as I promised. But here's the deal, you are going to sell it. You're going to take the money, put it in an account, and use it to pay off every single remaining debt. No more hiding things, no more pretending everything is fine. You're going to own up to everything you've done, and you're going to rebuild your lives from scratch. Not because I want to punish you, but because you have to start fresh. You have to learn the hard way that your choices have consequences. They sat there, stunned into silence. My father looked like he had just been slapped. My mother was biting her lip, trying to hold back tears. But I knew this was the only way they were going to truly learn, by facing the consequences of their actions. I'm not going to be your safety net anymore, I added. You have to do this on your own. If you ever truly want to regain your dignity, you have to rebuild it from the ground up. You've been given a second chance. Don't waste it. It felt good to say it. It felt right. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I wasn't doing this for them anymore. I wasn't doing it to earn their approval. I was doing it for me. I was finally standing up for what I had needed all along, to not be the one to always fix things. The weeks after that conversation were surreal. My parents, though initially resistant, began to realize the wisdom in what I had said. Slowly, they started making changes, small ones at first, like finally facing their debts and reaching out to a financial advisor for help. The house was sold, and the proceeds went toward paying off their remaining loans. They rented a smaller place, one they could actually afford. But the most significant change came not in their finances, but in their relationship with me. My father, who had never truly acknowledged how much I had sacrificed, began to make an effort. He still wasn't perfect, but he started showing me that he understood. He apologized, not just for his actions, but for the way he had treated me. I didn't need a grand declaration of love or a heartfelt thank you. What I needed was something more subtle, something real, respect. For the first time in my life, I felt like my parents finally saw me, not just as their daughter, but as an equal. I wasn't just the responsible one who picked up the pieces. I was someone worthy of their respect, someone who could stand on her own and demand the same from them. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. But it was enough. And it was my revenge, not in the way I had once fantasized about, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that they would never take me for granted again. I had taken control, not through cruelty or punishment, but through strength and the knowledge that I deserved more than they had ever given me. And that, in the end, was the most satisfying victory of all.